Hey, one more thing before you go. Christianity, demonic hordes of Lucifer, the New World Order, Reptilian Shape Shifters, and a self-proclaimed prophet. We touch on all of this and more when we have a conversation with an investigative journalist and his latest journey into a unique underworld of murder and an online cult. I'm your host, Michael Hurst. Join the conversation as we discuss that thing about being dragged into the light with Tony Russo. Hey, my guest in this episode is Tony Russo. He's an investigative journalist who tells compelling stories about ordinary people. It's been Tony's specialty for the entirety of his journalism career, which spans more than 20 years. Whether profiling artists, community leaders, or combat veterans, he has a knack for helping people connect to personal stories. In addition to writing about craft beer revolution, Tony wrote and hosted This Is War. It was a narrative podcast documenting personal stories of combat veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're going to have a conversation about his most recent work, Dragged into the Light, Truthers, Reptilians, Super Soldiers, and Death Inside an Online Cult, which looks into how one nondescript woman was able to tap into the rising paranoia that birthed the conspiracy theory culture. Welcome to the show. So, you've got an interesting journalistic career, Tony.
Thank you. Yes, I've covered sewers. I've covered ribbon cuttings. You know, I once wrote a story about a girl who was named after the town that I was covering, and then I did the whole the combat veterans thing. I've done if it's happened, I've written about it. There aren't a lot of general assignment reporters that are just like, no, really, I'll write about anything. But that's me. That's what I do. If I think it's interesting, I can write about it.
You can put it down. Well, let's talk about a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in New Jersey, Union Beach, New Jersey. It was it's about right between, let's say, Asbury Park, if you may have heard of Asbury Park, and New York City. So, maybe half an hour out of New York City on a Sunday afternoon, 3 hours out of New York City on a Monday at 7:00. I just had a normal life, and I was in the hotel business for a while, and then I went to college as an old person. I went when I was 30. I got 2 degrees. I got one in philosophy and one in history, and my intention had been to be a philosophy professor. What happened was, I got divorced, and I had to stop going to school. So I looked around to see what I was qualified for, because I don't know if you know, but there's not a ton of money in philosophy. But as it turned out, I was a really good writer, and I've always been a really good writer. And the history degree and the philosophy degree helped me learn how and when to do research, and how to take things that are really complex and make them simple so other people could understand them. So I was a good fit for journalism. So, and also I had my children, and I wanted to have a flexible schedule. And, as a reporter, sometimes you have to work late at night. Sometimes you have to work early in the morning, but you also have a lot of flexibility in, you can write at home. I was fortunate. This was right around the time where it was becoming kind of acceptable to work. Like, I've been working at home for almost 20 years now. You pop into the office and you check in, but I could file my stories electronically. And then when I became editor, I could, I put the whole paper together, in my living room. There was a halcyon summer where I actually put the paper together while having a cigar. There was a local cigar place, and I would go, and and it had Wi-Fi. So I would get a cigar and, just smoke my cigar like it was 1930, and put the paper together right there in this back room of this cigar store. And that was really, really pleasant. But,
question is, did you have the hat with the press?
I didn't. I was one step short of that. I'm more of a flat top guy anyway. I wear the peak caps, not the not the big fedoras. That's my brother who wears the fedoras.
Yeah, my father. I remember my father took some classic pictures where he put the fedora on and the big press thing in the center of it, and then he had a
Yeah.
pipe instead of a cigar and typing at the typewriter. It's one of my best memories, actually, of him. It was pretty cool. So
Yeah.
you, the paper, when you talk about the paper, was it an independent paper?
Yeah, there was,
national?
I live on the Delmarva Peninsula, which is Ocean City, Maryland is probably or Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. There are vacation resorts, and I live in that area, and there are thousands, free papers, and I've written for 998 of them, I think. But at this time, I spent the bulk of my early career at a paper called the Bayside Gazette, and we covered a very small town called Berlin, Maryland. But it was in the middle of like a boom era for the town, so I got to do a lot of really interesting things there. And then from there, I ran the business section of a local daily. I've been a columnist. It's one of the secrets about I don't know if you've seen the movie Broadcast News with Albert Brooks.
Yeah.
Um, there's at the end of the movie, spoilers, everyone's supposed to get fired and he doesn't get fired and he quits. And they say, "Why'd you quit?" And he said, "Well, I realized that I'm cheap and I know everything and they will never fire me for that reason." And that was pretty much my career. It's like, well, I already know, once you know how the inside of a newspaper works, you're always going to be employable.
Yeah.
Because that's something it's a pain in the neck to teach at this point. So, there are a lot of either, kids out of college work around here, and then, old guys. There's not a lot of people in the prime of their careers because, that doesn't pay very well. And there's not a lot of upward mobility. I've almost always reported directly to the publisher. It's like the publisher is the editor, and I'm one of, even I worked at a daily paper and there were 5 of us in the newsroom, 5 reporters in the newsroom, with a total of 20 years of experience. And 18 of those years were between me and this other guy. And then everybody else, it was their first newspaper job. It's just, it was the last decade has been a really weird time to be in the news business. And that's why I've kind of moved into independent journalism, because I can do more and I'm not tied down to things.
I think it's really, I mean, obviously the pandemic has changed some things, but so has the news industry in totality. When you and I had a little bit of a conversation before we started where, I told you I grew up in a newsroom, and, I looking at it from that perspective with my father typing on a typewriter, and then as things moved forward from that, and one of my first jobs actually was working for the same newspaper that my father worked for, and I was working pay stub, the old pay stub where
my first editor did that
with the pay stub. Yeah. They would bring you'd get sheets, you have to cut it out, you have your fingers be full of glue, and they've got the gluey stuff, and you piece together the page on a board in front of you, and everybody bring you different things, and each person that was on this line, you'd stand there at this like an easel type board, and each person had a page, and you'd make your page, and then that page would then, as sticky as it was, would then go in to get shot on a camera, which I worked at too. That negative would then go on to a thing to make the plates, and then the plates would go on the machine. It was crazy process. Now, as you know, everything can be done on a computer pretty much, right?
Yeah, and by one person. That's, it's the papers that I've worked for, that was one of those things, is I could still put the paper together and also write for it. And that's one of the things that gave me kind of like a more employable status, because I could do production and writing and editing, which is nobody, that's something that only old people do. Young people do either production or writing or editing, and being able to do all 3 made it easier stay employed
You,
for
you
a long
keep
time.
saying that O word. That's
Yeah, I know.
almost
So
like,
you
like
know
it's
what?
a dirty word.
No, I just gotta own it. I don't. I remember when I was a young man, how it bothered me when people would pretend they weren't old when they really were. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm like, my
Embrace
friends
it.
and I had like this pact about being old. And, my hair is going gray and it's going to go gray. And, I'm not going to be afraid to admit that I know things that only old people know because I only know them. Right.
Exactly.
It's an
We're
advantage.
wise.
Absolutely.
We're wise. We have the answers. Even if you don't think it's the right answer, we've got them. We
Yeah,
really,
and we're not afraid to guess. Absolutely.
exactly. Yeah, it's good. And the alternative to the O word is the D word,
Yeah, which is not as good.
which is not as good. No. So having the old word is fine. So let's talk about investigative journalism. What is the difference between a newspaper reporter, for example, and an investigative journalist?
Well, it's I think more of a process than anything else. So, uh, when you're working at like day to day at a paper, you go to stuff, you see what happens, and you write it down. And the idea of doing investigative journalism is more like for long form stories. So I don't do a lot of, I mean, I still do occasionally I freelance and I'll do some, spot news and things like that. But I like to develop stories that are longer, that are more involved. It's something that's maybe closer to 5,000 words. A regular news story is usually between 500 and 1,200 words. Something that you would read in a newspaper, or something that you would read online. Even they usually try to keep it around 1,200 words. But I like to tell deeper stories that are more involved. So I don't just go to court and listen to what happens. I also go into the court records and go into the people's backgrounds and interview people who were either, like in this case, I interviewed in the Sherry Shriner story, the Dragged Into the Light. I interviewed people who the police didn't interview, and I interviewed people that people had trouble finding. So tracking people down, doing an investigation as a police officer might, or as as a detective might, um, looking for more, looking beyond the surface. Thank you. Sorry. Looking beyond the surface of the story is investigative, I think.
And I'm sure, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that it's a lot easier for you to get information because people will talk to you as a journalist more than sometimes than they would talk to a police officer like myself.
People are really, really, really hesitant to talk to journalists a lot of the time, because there is this kind of sense that people are going to get their words twisted. It's a genuine fear, and I think in some ways for good reason. What I realized in the 20 years of journalism is there's a difference. Like, uh, a lot of times when someone will say I was taking out of context or they got it wrong, what they really mean is you wrote what I said, not what I meant. And
Wow.
I don't know what you meant. I only know what you say. And that's the weird disconnect, I think, a lot of times between the press and the public, is this idea that I can only hold you accountable for the words that you say. I can't hold you accountable for what I think you mean, And
Right.
so if you don't, and a lot of times, one of the ways that I combat that is I'll stop a person and I'll say, okay, let me tell you what you just told me, because this is what I think. And if you don't mean it, I don't want to get it wrong, and that's something that has to do with being, more experienced.
Right.
And with the This Is War podcast, it's also being open to learn, to just let someone talk and to let the questions kind of come a little bit more naturally, because This Is War, which is, I'm very proud of it. It was a great show. It was depressing. It was so sad. But, you have to give people the space to tell these stories. And if you want to get the good story, you have to let people wander a little bit in ways that maybe a straight journalist doesn't have time for. Like, here's my question. As you were saying, like, sometimes it's hard to take off the cop hat and say, here's my question, answer it. When one of the interview one of the interview practices that I use, if I ask a question and it's not getting answered, I'll keep letting them talk until they're done saying what they want to say, because it's clearly something that's on their mind, even though it might not be a direct answer to my question. What I have to remember is my question made them think of this thing. And so rather than redirect them, I wonder what about my question made them answer it in this way.
Which is a really good thing. I mean, I've read part of this book already. I've not finished it completely yet, but I am about 2/3 of the way through it. And in reality, you're a good writer. I mean,
Thank you.
the story is compelling and you move things forward, even though, I mean, obviously I know it comes from fact and that interests me from that perspective, especially my background in law enforcement. Just the unique twist of all of that coming together, it compels me to continue to read. But yeah, I think there's a fine line there. What got you into conspiracy theories? What was your interest in there?
That was simply, I wish it were a better story, but This Is War got canceled, and they're like, okay, well, what else do you want to do? And I was actually looking at a different conspiracy that I'm hoping to write about this year. I'm just getting my notes together to start in on it again. And one of my colleagues at the podcast company was like, have you heard about this lizard thing? And it was as simple as that. And I'm like, no, what lizard thing? And so I looked it up, and at first it just seemed too kooky. But then once I started digging, I realized that the kooky wasn't what was interesting about it, that there were real people who were hurting and being hurt underneath, what we think of as just silly, kooky things. And again, I'm writing the book in 2019. So it's just on the cusp of the 2020 election. And it was just a weird time to watch the culture change. And as I mentioned in my book, like, I finished the book was already edited on January 6th of last year. And I went back and I had to add the Christmas bomber and the January 6th, because they could have been in my book. They could have been anyone in my book. I'm sure there were people who were Sherry Schreiner's followers who were in the Capitol on January 6th. And the Christmas bomber, his name was Anthony Warner. He in Nashville, I don't know if anyone recalls, but in Nashville on Christmas of 2020, the 2020 didn't happen. 2019, he blew up an RV in Nashville, and one of the things, and again,
Downtown.
and it was kind of underreported that he, only because it sounds kooky, right? Lots of people haven't read my book, so I don't hold anybody responsible for this. But if you had read my book, that the detail that he would go out into the woods to fight aliens becomes so much more rich. Like it's like, oh, because that is what they do. Like, they really do go out and fight aliens in the woods. And it's not just, he's not alone. And that's what, I really kind of wanted to bring home. We think of these people as wingnuts, but they're not. They're real people who really believe things the same way that you and I believe them, and they act upon them. And taking them seriously is critical. Laughing at them, people were laughing at that guy until he blew his RV up,
Yeah, I have a cousin that just was newly on the job in the police department out there.
Wow.
When that took place. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I had a conversation, and the individuals that do follow my podcast and that have listened to it recently, in regard to a woman who wholeheartedly is full-fledged into reptilians and being visited by aliens. Her husband is in prison at the moment. He was a naval officer, but he got involved in this murder that literally everything pointed right back to this particular guy. He had two guys roll over on him, but everything, the CIA supposedly set them all up, and the reptilians did this, and then they were going to create this little island all their own, and it was going to be a safe haven for reptilians and aliens. And to be honest, when I first had the interview, I almost didn't hear it because it was so far-fetched and crazy. From my perspective, I mean,
No, but what's driving it is less crazy.
yeah,
At the risk of being too self-referential, I describe these people as canaries in the coal mine. Like we have a cultural problem that we have to solve, and these are the first people that
yep,
they're sensitive to it, but they don't know what to do with this information. Like they're trying to fit information that isn't already part of their worldview, and they don't know how to do it. So they have to twist things to make them make more sense. Specifically, one of the things that, again, I feel like we could talk about more. I don't mean you and I mean we as a culture could talk
right.
about more, is this idea that aliens are not aliens at all, but rather demons. Because
we could have a conversation in the future all about that.
well, what fascinates me about it is that, so the reason for that is that there are a lot of people who are evangelical Christians who can't believe in evolution. And since they can't believe in evolution, they can't believe in aliens. But since they know that there definitely are aliens, then they must be something else, right? And so this is that whole idea of folding reality into your own worldview and making a new reality. So now, no, they're not aliens, they're demons, and that makes sense. And they can live in that world where these reptilians are actually the spawn of Satan rather than, little green men from outer space.
Oh yeah, we're gonna have to touch on have another talk, Tony. We're gonna have to have another talk. Yeah, it's gonna be that in itself. But with the conversations that I've had on this particular podcast, I've talked to angel speakers, and I've talked to there's just a wide variety. If anybody that's been with me this whole, I've got like 149 episodes out. They'll find a variety of introspects with that. And a lot of it, is a little out there, but some of it makes sense, kind of a thing. So yeah, we'll have to approach this if you don't mind. That would be great. So in regard to when you were talking about, you had to go back and kind of change some things in the book because of the stuff that had come out in January,
right,
of 2020. We're talking about QAnon and things like this.
Yes, I would want to. So early in my research, so the book is one of maybe 6 cults that I was looking into. And early on in my research, one of these cult leaders, who I'm not really ready to talk about yet, was claiming to be Q. And, the followers who I was talking to were like, she says that she's Q. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like it was so well part of the QAnon was so well part of the conspiracy culture, at least I think in 2017, maybe even earlier. This idea of, this wider conspiracy that everything falls under. And what I came to realize was that everything that Sherry Shriner, the person who I ended up writing about, espoused was like a distillation of what we start to think of now as the QAnon movement, which is less a list of things that people believe as much as an organization of people who don't believe the official story. Like QAnon is more an attitude than a belief system, I think, is the way I would put it.
It's interesting, the Sherry Shriner, after I had read part of your book and what you sent me before we scheduled this interview, actually, I had never known she had existed before then. But what an amazing introspect into basically, like you said earlier, a cult, so to speak.
Yeah.
How'd you find her, for example? Why did you pick her for this book?
Well, she was behind what was, she was behind two deaths. And that's why I started looking into it so there's this woman named Barbara Rogers. I'll tell the briefest part of the story that I can. So there's this woman named Barbara Rogers who was dating this man named Stephen Minio. And they were calling themselves a married couple, and they were living in Tobyhanna, Pennsylvania. And Stephen was really into Sherry Shriner and her ministry, and Barbara was less so. Not necessarily against it, but just not as enthusiastic as Stephen was. And one day, Sherry sent Stephen a text message that says, Barbara is a reptilian vampire and she's going to destroy you. And just for context, this would be like getting a text message from the Pope saying your wife is a devil. This wasn't just like a friend. This was, as far as Stephen believed, God's mouthpiece on earth is what she called herself. So, but God's emissary. This is like a legit prophet, like up there with any of the other prophets in Christianity. And so, it blew his mind, and he was horrified by it. And so he started saying, no, you're a false prophet. But then, a couple months later, he was dead and Barbara was holding the gun that killed him. And that alone, is why the story got, immediate traction. There was it was a national story for a couple days, because it's like, he killed her because he believed she was a reptile, which isn't the case at all. I mean, there's not even evidence of that. But this idea that there was this prophet that prophesied that Barbara would kill Stephen, and then Barbara was arrested for killing Stephen. That's what really made it like, wow, what is this? What is this about? That kind of extreme coincidence. You want to get an answer on that if you can.
Yeah, that's really. I mean, what a bizarre. To me, it boggles my mind. I mean, obviously, being a cop, I've seen a lot of things. I mean, a lot of things. But I mean, including a guy that attacked and killed his 6-year-old daughter with an axe because he felt, because she was throwing temper tantrum, that the devil was in her.
Right.
That kind of a thing.
That happens a lot. Yeah.
It kind of just far-fetched things like that. A guy, I can go on and on about those stories, but it blows me away that people get drawn into something like this belief. Do you have any introspect on what causes that? Why people are drawn to, wow, I got to believe Sherry Shriner. I got to really listen to this alleged prophet.
Yeah, I think that there's several reasons. That there's a deep loneliness that I think we have to always kind of keep in the back of our mind. Like a lot of these people are really looking to connect with people who don't think that they're crazy. So they find other people who believe the same thing. And, I think that people blame the internet for lots of things. But I think the internet facilitates these things, but I don't think it causes them. For me, it's interesting because of your last show. For me, 9/11, or the last show that I listened to, 9/11 is a bigger factor than I think we give it credit for. It broke a lot of people, and some rightfully so. But people of there are people of faith who are really just, they thought it was going to be the end of the world, and then the world didn't end, and now they've got to figure out why. The idea that there's some reason that the world hasn't ended yet, and so they're looking for explanations. A lot of the people that I interviewed, and a lot of conspiracy theorists, they really believe that these are the like biblical end times. They don't believe that that there's a I don't know, let's say an asteroid coming, or, they don't believe that, we're going to drink up all the water and then die of thirst. They believe that God and the devil are going to show up and have a massive battle here on planet Earth. And they're preparing for that, and they're looking for evidence that it's about to happen. They want to be ready for it when it happens. And this just sends them looking for evidence that doesn't exist, but desperate to find some anyway. And so if anybody says, well, I have evidence, then they gravitate toward that person because it gives them a weird kind of comfort to know that they're right and that the world is about to end and that there are devils present in our everyday lives. And, that Lucifer is trying to hurt them personally. At least that explains why their lives are so awful. The idea that they're not great at talking to people, and that they, stay away from their friends and family, and that they spend all their time on the internet isn't a factor in why their lives are bad. Their lives are bad because the devil's here and trying to make it worse. And they're right about the first part. The reason their life is bad is because of the way that they're living it, because they believe that the world's about to end. And it's this weird cycle that is really, really difficult to break. I was on a show last year with a guy, the host was a pro reptile guy. And it was just fascinating to hear how incredulous he was that I wasn't convinced, given all the evidence that I've seen, that I wasn't convinced that the world was being run by, reptiles.
Hey, just a real quick reminder that you can find us anywhere that you listen to podcasts, including YouTube. We thank you for your support and or appreciate you joining us each and every week. Please remember to subscribe and or follow us and tell others how much you've enjoyed One More Thing Before You Go. We would greatly appreciate it. We do have an app available for you free. You can find it in the App Store or on Google Play to download. It is compliments of SuperPass, our sponsor. It will give you the unique opportunity of carrying One More Thing Before You Go with you anywhere that you are. You'll have easy access to the video and to the audio, as well as other bonus material and the opportunity to join our VIP membership, which we highly encourage. If you love One More Thing Before You Go as much as we do, please take time to support us with either buy me a coffee or check out our unique merchandise that we have available in the link in the show notes. Each time you buy a t-shirt or a coffee cup or a hat, it helps us to be able to continue to bring you this program to the best of our ability and expand what we bring to you to inspire, motivate, and educate you. Be sure to check out SuperPass. You'll find the link in the show notes for any of your business, podcast, or video needs. It's a unique opportunity for your audience, business, or listeners to have an entertainment hub directly connected to you in the palm of their hand. Wow. Yeah, see, to me, I mean, you think of this world, especially as we have evolved, and the education opportunities that are here, that people would be, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, people would be more intelligent than that. People would be more open to the fact that this is really kind of a far-fetched,
right.
You know what I mean? Ideal of reptilians running around the planet. I mean, obviously, I believe in UFOs. I believe in aliens. I believe in the masses of the universe, that there is no way, anyhow, that there cannot be life from other planets that are here that may be more evolved than we are. And that that to me it is a possibility that does exist.
And I it's certainly not anything that I'm going to discount, but I don't think that Queen Elizabeth is one of them, and that she's wearing, and that she's a reptile, wearing the Queen's skin, on her face.
Yeah, see that's a little bit, that's kind of a little bit deep.
But that's the thing, like when you're searching for, I think the difference is searching for whether they're here than trying to prove that they're here. That's kind of the disconnect that can send people down the wrong kind of rabbit holes. Like
Right.
like we mentioned, I think before we were talking, we were saying being silly, we would mention something about Men in Black, and that kind of the idea that the idea that there could be alien people who are on the planet and passing for human or whatever, or hidden away. I don't begrudge that idea. That's fine. It's just that they're already running things seems far-fetched. You think they'd be better at it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you're going to bring, yeah. Although it does beg the question as to why we have, this computer in our hand
Right.
here that is probably 1,000 times more powerful than the one that landed the first thing on the moon.
Right. Yeah.
And it's at our fingertips. And you go, where'd you get this technology? Does somebody just sit there and dream it up and go, oh, I think I'm going to create this, and here we go. So, I think the opportunity exists that maybe, they may be sharing information with us, but not necessarily running everything. Because I think if they were running everything, there'd be a lot less of,
Yeah.
I'm trying to pick my words carefully. There'd be a lot less junk going on at the moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It can be. I think it's the wrong way to go about. You were saying about intelligence, and one of the weird things is it's not so much intelligence as it is focus. Like, one of the things I was saying when we first started, when I took my degree in history, you have to do research, and you have to learn what counts as research.
Yeah.
And we can look up anything, but we don't necessarily, that many of us don't have the training of contextualizing all the information we have. Like, we see two things that look similar, and then we can make up a story that connects the two. And one of the things that you're not allowed to do when you're doing real research is connect things for no reason. Like, if you have something on, let's say, a foot away, then you have to fill that whole foot. You can't just put in a dot at 6 inches and say that it connects, because you haven't demonstrated it. And
Right.
the bar for having demonstrated something in, what I would like to say is in professional journalism circles, but that hasn't been true for some time. So I probably, but so let's just say in kind of like more of an academic account of how we learn things, is you have to demonstrate everything, and anything that's not demonstrated, you say, I can't demonstrate this, but I think this for that reason. One of the things spoilers, so Stephen Mineo dies in the book on page 1. Like, the book, he's dead, but the scene with him dying is toward the end of the book. And I allude to my own pet theory about how and why he died, but I don't come right out and say it, because it's so tenuous that it would be irresponsible for me to say this is what happened.
Right.
So I'm sorry. So I say this is what happened, and I'm like, and this is why I think it happened. I've been very interested. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mandela effect. I'm feeling like you probably have. Oh. So I think that, and now I'll say this out loud, having given this whole story about why this is irresponsible to say, but this is my opinion based on my research. But I don't have any evidence I don't have enough evidence to support this to say that it's what happened. But I believe that Stephen thought that he was going to switch realities when he died. He'd been very interested in the Mandela effect. And I'm sorry, for listeners who may not know, the Mandela effect is believing that there's an alternate history that you remember, but you're not living anymore. And I believe that Stephen believed that he could cross back into an alternate dimension by this thing called virtual suicide, which I'm sorry, I've been going on. Let me get a quick sip here. So virtual suicide is, I don't know if you've heard of Schrodinger's cat.
I have not.
So, all right. So Schrodinger's cat is this theory in physics that I ill understand, and most people ill understand it. It's about quantum physics. And it essentially says that because of the rules that we're using now to talk about quantum physics, it would mean that there is a cat that's in a box and it's alive. But if you open the box and look at it, then the cat will be dead. So it's technically a cat that's alive and dead at the same time. But that's not the point. The point isn't that the cat is alive and dead at the same time. The point is that our theories aren't working the right way. And so there's a similar thing applied to suicide. When you pull the trigger, the gun either will or will not go off. So there's only a 50% chance that you die. If you put the gun, if you put a gun in your head and pull the trigger. That's not true at all. Right.
Well, of course.
But the idea was just to illustrate that we're thinking about quantum physics wrong. And I don't think about quantum physics at all because I'm not bright enough, so
Me either.
you have people. Yeah. So you have people who are ill-equipped to talk about quantum physics, using it to make decisions in their daily lives. And I feel like Stephen thought that he had really good odds that when the gun went off, he would wake up in a different reality.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, actually. It's. I think that what I found fascinating about the book, like I said, I'm not done with it yet. I have to be forthcoming and honest, but I'm 3/4 of the way through it. What I found in a compelling aspect of it is you tell the story from a very unique approach, and you unfold the facts that are present, as well as intertwining what your theory is, which I think is fine, because even as a cop, we do that that's how we investigate. We say, okay, well, do you have means, mode, and opportunity? And you kind of go, well, wherever the means. Then you start playing around with that. What's the mode? You play around with that. You play around with what's the opportunity. You play around with that. And you piece it. You kind of piece everything together like that. I think that we all have to do that in order to comprehend. When I investigated somebody that was murdered, you don't know the whole story because you weren't visually there, or you weren't part of that at the time that it took place. You have to hypothesize what you think took place and then kind of piece that together, and then hope that when you present that to your suspect, they'll go, yeah, well, that's exactly what happened.
Right. And it makes sense. One of the things that it's been divisive. Some people like the fact that I did it, and some people don't like the fact that I did it, but I thought the story needed to be told in this way. I stop every now and again and say, okay, this is what I think, and this is why I think it. And I try to get the reader to put themselves into these people's shoes. And I do that by adding, stories about my own life or other things that aren't necessarily part of the action of the story, but I think are examples that people can connect with, because the story on its own is just so it can be so bonkers and it can be so convoluted, and I didn't want to lose people. Like early drafts, my beta readers and even my editor, even when I got to the point where the editor was looking at it, they were like, this is too much. It's too much crazy without explanation, and a list of crazy things doesn't make for compelling reading. And that's why I told the story in the way that I chose to tell it, which is almost in the first person. It's as much about my investigation as it is about the story. Right. And that's what makes it a little bit easier to digest. And it's also the way I write the best. I mean, all of my stories, even my, even when I was doing This Is War, one of the, so when I was doing This Is War, I would interview someone and they would say something about, well, the first time I got shot at, it was no big deal. It's just people taking pop shots, out in the desert or whatever. And I would stop them and I would say, all right, listen, no one has ever fired at me in anger. I have no idea what that's like. I don't know what it's like to hear a gun go off. That was meant technically for me. And you didn't either. So tell me about that. And they would be like, oh, that's right. You don't know what it's like to, but after 5 or 6 years of enduring gunfire, you forget what it's like to be afraid to be shot at.
Well, yeah, you get complacent, and you get, it becomes a normal part of your life. That's when I retired from the police department. We had this discussion. I had to kind of get out of the mode that I was in, where I was constantly looking we'd go into a restaurant and I'd have to see who was cooking and who was there because I
Right.
wasn't going to eat the place that somebody, which I've done before. We go in and then we get up and say, let's go. We're not eating here. Why not? Because I arrested that guy who's cooking food. You sit with your back to the door. There are so many things that you do that are inbred within you in your line of work or your career that it just becomes second nature with
Right.
regard to it. Basically complacent.
Well, and also from my side, I have to tease out of you the things that you don't think are important about your story. And that's why I like to talk to people who aren't used to being interviewed, who aren't already used to the public eye. I like to talk to people who don't understand how important their lives already are, because then I can bring that out. And A, I think it makes for a very satisfying story, even when it's a horrible story. But B, it also, the people I talk to they're like, yeah, I am important. I did do interesting things in my life.
Right.
And I never even realized it. That's my favorite part when I was in the newspaper business too. You interview somebody and you do a profile story on somebody who makes donuts or something. They're like, nobody ever asked me those questions. And it's good to make people take a second and think about why their lives are important and how their lives are different. Unfortunately, in this case, a lot of the lives are different for maybe less good reasons than a guy who makes donuts.
Well, although donuts are important.
Donuts are very important.
Donuts are important. Yeah, especially from a cop's perspective. Donuts.
Yeah, no, I can. Yeah.
Donuts are important. I realize that's a cliche, but hey. This book, you talk about being a look, and let me try that in English. An insight and esoteric take on Christianity. Believers assemble in internet chat rooms to stave off the demonic. Hang on a second here. Demonic hordes of Lucifer, the New World Order, the cell phone towers, and reptilian shapeshifters. You kind of touch upon all of that within the book and within itself. How does Christianity kind of pop into this? And
and this is it was another kind of not I wouldn't say contentious, but it was an area that when I wrote the podcast about it, it was something that it's tough to talk about Christianity because you're going to hurt people's feelings. And I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But I also don't want to say that this isn't Christian, because it is. I mean, these are people that many of them still were going to what we would consider a traditional church, maybe like a Baptist church or an Assemblies of God church, churches that we think of as maybe more conservative, but certainly Christian. And these people weren't getting, as I kind of alluded to before, after the world didn't end, they were looking for a way to understand why the world hadn't ended yet. And so then they went even farther to the right with Sherry Shriner, who, claimed to be a prophet from God. She claimed she used the Bible. She used something called the Bible Codes, the Bible Code, which was a computer program that helped her do her prophecy. And it was very much a Christian sect, and it drew very heavily on Christian belief. And that's an important aspect, because when people say that these people were crazy, we have a lot of, many, if not most people in the country who identify as religious, identify as Christian. But the differences between beliefs in Christian sects are, extraordinary. I mean, I grew up in a household where I was raised Catholic, and my mother was, Lutheran, Dutch Reformed, which is more like a Calvinist kind of thing. But, they believed radically different things. And it was always a confusion to me when I'm like, well, why do we say that we're the same religion? Because we're not. And some of those differences are, I wrote a blog post about this. I like to write about, religion and belief, especially since doing this story. And, when I grew up, I said I don't know. So Catholics believe that Mary didn't have any other children after Jesus, and Protestants broadly believe that she did. And, you know, in my house growing up, when I asked about it, they're like, yeah, you know, we just believe different things. And, you know, what I said in this blog post was like, what did the parents tell their kids in Northern Ireland? They didn't say that they just believe that it's just a mild, you know, when you have bombs going off on buses, it's not a mild disagreement about whether or not Mary had kids, you know?
Yeah, it is, excuse me. I mean, when you start looking a little more into, especially from this perspective, with the fact that Christianity, I'm very careful about how I talk about Christianity, because I grew up Catholic, but I'm not Catholic anymore. I'm not a practicing Catholic. You know, I believe in God, believe in the devil, I believe in heaven, believe in earth, but I'm more spiritual than I am, you know, from I won't say
Dogmatic.
I'm sorry.
More spiritual than dogmatic.
Exactly, more spiritual than dogmatic. You know, kind of perspective. Especially growing up Catholic, there's a whole new interesting thing about that. But I have found that in those environments that they really, in organized religion, especially, they kind of meld these creations and mold you the way that they want you to believe, to kind of. And again, this would be a whole new conversation, but you know, they help you to kind of well, like this, with the thing with demonic hordes going after Lucifer, and that the demons and the devils, and you know, if somebody's throwing a temper tantrum, they must be by the devil. You know,
yeah.
If this is a reptilian, well, obviously it's not a reptilian; it's a demon, it's the devil, and to kind of keep you in line.
Yes. And not only that, but also to explain away, you know, responsibility in a lot of cases. I spoke with one person who's a teacher, and this person said, you know, when the kids are being bad, I realize that the devil's just using them to get to me. So I don't get mad, and I don't let the kids get to me, because I know it's just the devil. And like, that's not something you say at a job interview for a job you want.
Well, exactly.
You know?
Exactly. 100%. 100%. Let's talk about how to get hold of your book and a little bit more about it before we
Sure.
go. Our
Absolutely.
time is coming to an end. So here's your book. For those of you that are listening and not watching, we'll let you, Tony, take it away.
Oh yeah. So my book is Dragged into the Light: Truthers, Reptilians, Super Soldiers, and Death Inside an Online Cult. My name is Tony Russo. You can get the book anywhere you can get books. You can get it through Amazon. A lot of times, if you want to get it at a local bookstore, you can go to bookshop.org, and you can buy it from bookshop.org, and like they'll give credit to your local bookstore if you're as it looks like some places are going to be entering, you know, at least some sort of quasi lockdown again soon. There's if you're not leaving your house, you can still get the book, I guess is the point. And from a local bookstore, you can get it. You can ask the local bookstore, they can order it. And also you can get it from your library in many cases. And if you ask at your library and they don't have it, they can get it for you. And, you know, then lots of people can read it. I've had some success with people, you know, getting the book in libraries. Also, I continue to write about these things and other things. I have a newsletter that I call a Bagel Manifesto, and you can get that at bagelmanifesto.com. And it's just talks about how belief and culture kind of change the way that we think about the world. And so it's more of a reflection on that. I have a problem with bagels. It's been kind of a running joke that people will sell. I'm sorry, you're in the Midwest, as I understand, right?
I'm in Arizona.
Mountain time.
I grew up in Colorado, but I live in Arizona now.
So there are some places that will sell stale bagels. And the reason that they can sell stale bagels is because most people get them toasted, and there's no difference between a toasted bagel and a stale bagel that's been toasted. And it drives me crazy. because I don't eat my bagels toasted. So if I get a stale bagel because I didn't order it toasted, I can, and it's happened enough that people talk about me behind my back. Like, people don't mention bagels around me anymore. So I use that idea that, I have to get used to the way that the world has changed and stop being mad about it. And so I look at the ways that the world has changed and, how I can be less mad about it if I'm mad about it, or, maybe an appropriate response. So far, I've done podcast episodes as well about the Mandela effect and about orgone. Those are just like 12 to 15 minute episodes every other week, just on a different aspect of, again, culture and belief. And that's bagelmanifesto.com. But my social handles are by Tony Russo, BYTONYRUSSO, and Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I have a TikTok account. I haven't worked up the courage yet to do a TikTok, but I feel like eventually I'm going to have to break down and try it.
I'm with you there. And just to put for the record, although I joked around about donuts, I'm more of a bagel cop. So we used to be a bagel joint not that far from us that made fresh bagels, and I was there every morning. Especially when I was working graveyard shift.
Nothing like a warm bagel.
Exactly, 100%. Listen, Tony, thank you very much for this amazing conversation, and thank you for presenting this book the way that you have. And I think that everyone needs to go out and get a copy of it. And I'll make sure that there are links within the show notes and on the website, beforeyougopodcast.com, so that people can easily access how to find you. And we're going to have a conversation in the future. I think we got a lot to talk about.
I'm always around. Thank you so much for having me.
Outstanding. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life. If you like our show and want to know more, check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. That's beforeyougopodcast.com. Tell your story, share your expertise, contribute to the blog, and subscribe to the newsletter. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.
And one more thing before you go. Have a nice day, have a nice week, and thanks for listening.
One More Thing Before You Go, a unique conversation about life podcast, is a creation of One More Thing Productions, established 2010, all rights reserved.